with that, just restating the purpose that has already been stated, we're going to look at the reports that we generate through Acadient's data management service, ALO. For those who use it, we're also just going to talk about how data is collected in general and the type of data that is meaningful for educators to make decisions based off the universal screening data that they've collected. So the goals or objectives for today would be that you deepen your understanding of Acadients as indicator measures, that you are able to sort of follow the use of data through a framework known as the outcomes-driven model for decision making, and that you would be able to map these data into key reports or visualizations that would help you answer questions from the decision-making framework. So I always like to start again about the purpose of Acadients reading as an assessment. These assessments as Acadients all serve similar purposes when it comes to screening and progress monitoring. So starting with the one Acadients Reading K6, that's the name of our product. You are implementing in grades K to 3. It is a set of indicator measures that help us to look at key skills along this continuum to catch kids who may be at risk for reading difficulty, to find the areas in which they are at risk so we can target support, to be able to monitor our support, and to be able to look at the overall effectiveness or impact of our instruction. I like to also talk about Acadients, again, briefly as an indicator, meaning not unlike medical models where we use indicators of health and general well-being, like seen here. We might use a graph that would represent the performance of, a student. Like in the medical model, we would use indicators like height or weight to chart growth. And we can look at that individually in the way a thermometer tells us if we have a temperature. We can see if a reading indicator measure tells us that we have an opportunity to focus our attention and support towards a student in a skill area. But we also can look at the data into larger groups of students, maybe in this conversation today, into the classroom, or at sometimes systems, across an entire grade level. And we're able to use these data indicators to be able to say when we see distributions of scores or performance that don't yield students being on track to be healthy readers, we can prioritize instruction and intervention supports for those kids so that we can change the picture and end up having more students on track according to these indicators and the benchmarks that align with them. Again, just reminding you that we see the same value you do in teaching all the skills necessary to support students to become readers, to go from the learning to read phase to the reading to learn phase, as is illustrated here in the row. Looking at each of these individual skills over time as indicators, being able to measure these indicators over time as well, to be able to ensure that we have students who are ready to move on to that, ready to learn independently, reading silently, and for meaning. The outcomes-driven model is a framework that we have used before in reference to all of our trainings. We anchor everyone into a framework that we can sort of help you see the use of data purposed different times for different purposes, right? For different seasons of the year. You may have another decision-making model, and that is fine. We use this one more to illustrate the need for a framework to use data, but our data can be applied to other frameworks. In the model that we have, we separate the model into 5 steps that all follow a cycle here. Each of these 5 steps make up the model. Some of the steps are assigned to be implemented after you collect benchmark data. Others are assigned to be implemented when you have progress monitoring data. So we go beginning at the first of the semester, we screen students at the beginning of a year, we identify those kids at risk, and we then check and validate that we have the right kids. That's the step 1 and 2 of the outcomes-driven model. Step 3 and 4, once we know we've got the kids at risk, separated from those who are likely to be okay with just first good instruction in general, ed tier 1 type of support, then we move them into this lower portion where you see highlighted here. And we go through a series of cycles from beginning of year to middle of year where we're iterating, we're planning a support for the student, we're implementing that support for the student, we're evaluating the support with that student using progress monitoring data to be the feedback loop. And we do this all throughout that first semester until we get back to the middle of the year benchmark period. And then we come to step 5 when we return back to the upper part of this graphic, and we use the benchmark data here to say, how did we do? So these are our 5 steps. Once you have your middle of the year data, then you move your middle of year data to start again, step 1. And then middle of the data sets up your next semester. So that's where we are now. And your middle of the year data, you would go through middle of year with step 1 and 2. Again, you would come back in to your middle of year data and say, let's plan based on the students we now identify at risk. You would plan, implement, and evaluate that support in the spring semester, leading up to your end of year where you would step into step 5 for your reviewing the outcomes. So this model, in the way we described it, is positioned for use 2 times. Once at the beginning of the year and then once again at the end of the year. But it also can be seen as a beginning to end of year model as well, so that when you get to the end of year, you can also review outcomes all the way back to the beginning of the year, not just to the midpoint. And so the reason that this is important is because we use this model to help us think about the important questions to ask and the important data visualizations and views to use to help support us in making timely decisions. The next series of slides are going to really apply this model, this outcomes-driven model, to an actual student so that you can see what it looks like. For reference, we have the 5 steps here. We have the questions that you would ask, and we mentioned these at the beginning of the year in the discussion about systems views. Today, we're going to focus on the column at the end, the questions that really are about the student view. And so we're going to apply the outcomes-driven model to a story about a student. So in this picture, you will see the model to the left, and it will illuminate over the various slides to show you which step we're in. Again, you see the 5 steps. We're going to follow a student along a journey here at the beginning of the year in this illustration. So we have a student who has taken the assessments. We have a composite score. We have individual measure results. Universal screening was a practice in this school, and we found this student to be one that we went through step 1, and we determined that they were a candidate to be in the area of need for support. And so we wanted to look at them and say, okay, what areas do they need support in? Well, at the beginning of first grade, we identified 2 key measures, PSF for phonemic awareness, NWF-CLS for early alphabetic knowledge, so the alphabetic principle, mapping grapheme to phoneme, the correct letter sounds. And we found that the student was at risk in both of those areas. So we were thinking that the student needs to be put into an intervention or support plan. So the way we can confirm that is that we can say, okay, let's take the student and let's check them 2 more times within the same week, but not on the same day, and get some validation points that confirm our initial result. You do not have to do step 2 for every student, but you can do step 2 for any student where you would like to have confirmation. So in this particular example, we think Ethan, the student, may need support. We go ahead and we measure Ethan a couple more times within that same week, but not on the same day, and we see an emerging pattern. It's very consistent. Ethan scores within a point or 2 of the initial score that we got at benchmark, and now we say, well, okay, he definitely is showing signs of need for support, and we decide that we're going to now put him into a process that supports creating a plan. The plan will end up having a goal. The goal will end up having, something to track against so that we can determine if the progress we're making is sufficient. And it will give us checkpoints to be able to make decisions about the resulting iteration to the plan that would need to be made in order to excel this opportunity. So keep asking your questions, and I will get to the questions at the end of the illustration, if that's okay. I just saw them coming in. If it's okay, I'll get to those questions in just a minute. So we set a meaningful, ambitious, and attainable goal as a first step in supporting the student. The Acadience Learning Online platform, if you are using the platform for data management, will create an initial goal for the student, but those goals are customized. I'll talk a little bit more about that later if you choose to create a customized goal. Once you have this beginning point and you have an aim line to the goal, now we know how we can measure progress, and we will be able to implement an intervention model that will be able to track across time. So the next thing we do is we go in and we introduce, we call it an intervention line or a phase change line, if you will, and we can write what change did we make after we found the student, Ethan, in need of support. Well, we decided we're going to go deliver a phonics-based program 20 minutes a week, 20 minutes each time for twice a week. And we're going to then see how Ethan performs against that change. And so we monitor him periodically across time, and we can see that after maybe every 2 weeks, so 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, the student isn't making the kind of progress that we would expect for the student to make. By the way, this could have also been weekly monitoring. I just used 2 weeks as an interval, but it could be every week. Well, now we have some data that tells us that if Ethan continues on this trajectory, he's below the aim line, which means he would never achieve the goal that we've set for him. So when we have a pattern that emerges where there are 3 data points below the aim line, it's time to pause and consider a change. We have to ask ourselves, is the intervention actually working? In this case, it doesn't seem to be adequately meeting the needs. There are lots of things we can change. It might be the program we change. It might be the time is a variable, the frequency of the intervention touch point. There's the size of the intervention group. There's lots of things that we can consider to change, but right now we know it's not meeting the needs of Ethan. So we decide that the change we'll make, a new intervention line, a new documentation, is we're going to go with the same program, the same interval, but instead of 2 times a week, we're going to go up into 4 times a week, and we're going to add some coaching and peer-assisted practice. And so these are the things that we can do, and we can document, and we can know from here the student was at risk. From here to here, we applied a change that didn't seem to work well. And now we're going to see what happens after the new change has been applied. And that's the evaluating and monitoring step inside of the outcomes-driven model. Now we see that once we made the second change, the results for Ethan start to trend upward until Ethan now has achieved being at least the aim line, which seems to say that this is working for him. This modification to change in number of days and the frequency, along with some other strategies, has resulted in Ethan getting back on track. And as long as Ethan maintains this level of progress week to week, we will see him achieve not only the goal that has been set for him, but in Acadience, we talk about growth percentiles by using a term pathways of progress. And we can see that he is also going to make typical progress, above typical in this case, compared to his peer group. So we're able to look at this in the 5-step model by coming back the next time we test him. Now we're at the middle of the year, where before we were at the beginning of the year, and we're able to come in and we're able to look at the skills, and we're able to see he's now not in the red zone for his composite score. And in the very discrete skill of correct letter sounds, he's back on track, meeting benchmark as the progress. And notice that that also articulated into other related skills, like being able to read words as whole words accurately and fluently the first time, and also being able to read words correct, accurately, and fluently inside of connected text. So I'm going to step back and say, our support and the changes we made worked for Ethan. Now we're looking at how we did here. We want to just emphasize always considering both the individual student progress as well as how that individual student progresses among their peer group and among the context, which is your system as well. So that said, I'm going to just stop for a moment and answer your questions before I go on. Just saying that when we do this, when we can apply the outcomes-driven model, the benchmark and progress monitoring practices, when we can deploy effective intervention, we can see those results change outcomes for kids. So the question is, do you use the progress monitoring materials for the validation? Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, we have 20 alternate forms for each of the measures that are related directly to a skill. So not NWF, that's a risk indicator letter naming, but for all of the, I said NWF, sorry, LNF, but for all the other measures, like in this case, NWF, you would have 20 alternate and equal forms. What that means is that at any given point in time, you can pull one of those as a validation point to what you're seeing. And so we do have that as the practice for benchmark assessment, followed by validation. Grab like form 1 and 2, get those 3 data points together, look and see where the data is confirming direction. And that's how we would use that. All right, seeing no more questions, let me keep going for just a moment here. So in the Acadience Reading K6 broad product portfolio, we are going to look at some data views and some data reports. So again, anchoring us back into this decision-making framework, looking at the questions here for the student level data review, we wanted to be able to say and help educators to find the most meaningful data that would help them answer these questions. So the first question that we would typically want to ask as educators about the data you have is which students may need support. So let's start with, we don't use Acadience Learning Online. Maybe you're doing something locally. Probably if you're creating your own local spreadsheet, you have all the students listed in a class or in a grade, and you can see from the data on the spreadsheet which students have been identified against those benchmarks, red, yellow, green, or blue, to determine that color coding association to risk profile. And so you'll be able to see that in your spreadsheet. But if you're using a data management system like Acadience Learning Online, it's really easy to just go straight to your list views or to be able to see your distribution graphs within a class, some of those to help you. So here is an example of a benchmark overview that would show you a class distribution, and then you could drill down into that and see specifically the students in your class that would be listed against their beginning or middle or end of year, or even against the time of year for the different skills. So you can drill into your individual class list to be able to see which students need support. Then for step 2, for validation, again, you can go in and drill in a little bit further, and you can see where you can see the individual measures. Maybe we would need to go in and check again this student who had an accuracy issue, maybe a retail issue, and you could go in and you could administer progress monitoring, to those students. You could look again at the student list view with pathways of progress as a growth indicator. You could also drill in when you plan support. You can drill into the individual item response patterns of students, and you can look in to say, okay, here's a student list. Now I want to drill into the way that the student is performing in measures. Now I want to drill into one of those measures, and I want to get in to see the actual item level response patterns. So you can go from always the bigger view, drilling into smaller views, and ultimately to the smallest view when you digitally score. If you don't digitally score using ALO as the scoring mechanism, but rather you use paper pencil as the scoring method, you would have the item results inside your scoring booklet. So it doesn't change the step 3 review of item level data. It's just one method, digital testing, puts that item level data inside of ALO. If you do it on paper, it puts that item level data inside of your scoring booklet. But either way, when you are thinking about planning support, we want to get all the way from the big view of the class. We want to get down to the particular sub-skills of a student or group of students. And we want to get all the way down to their individual responses to items to know how alike or different students are as we begin to plan our interventions and our group supports. So that's the step 3. At the step level 4, some examples of ways that you can look at data is you can drill in to ALO if you're using Acadience Learning Online, and you can get into one student view. You can get into the tabs here for that student. The overview tab will show all of their performance against all the measures as graphed for this year, or you can go back to prior years and see historical reference data as well. You'll be able to see if that student is being monitored in something that you have found to be a risk indicator, and you can see how they're progressing against that sort of support that's being provided. If you're not using ALO and you don't have your data in ALO, your graphs are on the cover of your progress monitoring booklets. So if you're using this in paper, you would have this graph drawn on the cover of your progress monitoring book. You would still be able to see a visualization like this. It's just being manually drawn or added by you as you graph by hand. And so those are really the differences. If you use the data system, it does the graphing for you. And then again, reviewing the outcomes, it takes you back to some of the other examples of reports that we have, taking you back to looking at distribution graphs, having you look at the students' progress against their pathways meaning the descriptive performance of that student and their growth over time compared to their matched peer group, those who scored like them at the beginning of the year and those who are traveling along the same journey and trying to get to the goal, and how they fare against their growth in that comparison group. We also have, again, some other features inside the data management system that you can look at. I didn't highlight some of the other ones, but there is always a way to look at progress monitoring data, as well as benchmark data, as well as individual results, as well as the results of this individual student in a small group, if you use the grouping feature, up to the larger class size group, up to the larger grade level group when necessary. Next, we wanted to talk about a few other features that were inside of ALO that might be relevant for student and classroom consideration. So we wanted to make sure that you understood something called initial grouping suggestions. Acadience has for a really long time had grouping worksheets that we trained people to use in a paper pencil format. That really suggests to educators that when you have a lot of data and it's hard to make sense of it all, how do you focus in on the 2 most important indicators of the student's need right now? And these grouping suggestions will highlight, and you'll see this highlighted here if you're in ALO, or highlighted here, different from the ones that are shaded gray. Right now it says we're going to look at these 2 measures, nonsense word fluency, whole words read, and oral reading fluency words correct. And we're going to look and we're going to say, at this example, for this particular class and these students here in group 1 all fit the pattern where they were at or above the benchmark. So what that tells me is that those students likely only need good first instruction. But you'll notice that we have another pattern that emerges from our class, and that pattern says the student is okay in one skill, but not okay in the other skill. And so in this one, 2 students were able to read nonsense words as words, and get to the benchmark, but they were unable to apply that into reading connected text and to read accurately, fluently, to hit the benchmark. The same is true here, but in the opposite way. We have two new ways of examining the data, all still looking at the same measures, but this pattern emerges where students are unable to read nonsense words to hit the benchmark. They are unable to do the CVC-VC pattern correctly, fluently, automaticity in hand to be able to get to the benchmark. But it appears as if when they read in connected text, they are reading enough words to show that they are accurate and fluent, and on the right track. So we have a pattern that emerges here, and then we have another pattern that emerged here, which is saying students are not okay in either one of these skills right now, and so they need the most intensive intervention and support for us. So we wanted to be sure that you knew that there was a grouping feature. We wanted to be sure that you understood how you can look at individual students by themselves in ways we talked about a moment ago, but you can also put them into view with others who are in your class that look similar to them, for the purpose of thinking about how to use interventions in the most strategic way, to maximize the time and the planning that you have for greatest gain for the whole. Anyway, and so we wanted to bring that up here. We also wanted to go back and mention that in the example that we used with Ethan, we talk about setting goals for students. And Acadience Learning Online, if you're using it for your data management system, will already create an initial goal for you. And once that initial goal is created, you have the ability to change it, customize it, based on the things that you know about your context, the classroom context, or maybe even the building context. And when you think about that, we wanted you to know that in the goal setting feature, you can come in and for every skill that's being assessed across that year and or at that time, you can come in and you can say, here's where the student was at the beginning of the year. And you can decide where you want that student to be at the end of the year, and you can establish different targets at the individual measure level. And when you do that, it will overall assign to the aggregate, to the composite kind of level. So notice in this example that if I were customizing it, even as I am moving the slider, this is a slider, these colors, red, yellow, light green, dark green, and blue, represent the pathways of progress, which really speaks to the growth that we think that we can get from this student when we compare him or her to peers. And you'll see that in every instance here, this student is in the above typical pathway, meaning we are pressing hard, saying that we think that we can get the most amount of growth out of the student. But when we set the goal using the pathway here, notice it doesn't always equal what would be the benchmark. So this ends up being the benchmark. And so this is why you'll want to sometimes customize, move the sliders to both consider what we think is growth possibilities, as well as we know what the benchmark has as a predictive probability to the future. And so maybe on this particular goal, we would have said, no, we need to raise this up a little bit, and we need to make sure that we at least get to not the well below, but to at least below benchmark as a step towards improving the outcome for this kid. And as you think about it, again, this will help adjust the overall composite for the end of the year, and be able to allow you to, again, achieve as much growth as possible for this year. Sometimes when you have kids who are more than 1 year behind, let's say they're pushing more like 2 years behind, it will take a very thoughtful, strategic, and maybe more than 1 year to catch them up. So again, goal setting helps us make the right amount of adjustment at just the right times to really try to capitalize on both the benchmark framework, which is predictive probability, as well as the growth percentile, which allows us to say what we think is possible, both meaningfully achieving, attaining that target or that outcome. And I have a document for you all on pathways and goal setting that I want to share in a moment that I'll bring up. And then the intervention line was something else that you saw in the example with Ethan. And we just wanted to make sure that you knew how to add an individual, how to apply this feature into an individual student when you're working with them and monitoring progress. So the way that you do this is you are inside of the individual student profile. You are in the overview section. You are where the graphs are being displayed. And then you're able to go to this section right here, which is to add an intervention line. And the minute that you click this, it will pop open and ask you for a date. When do you want to start the intervention line? And it will ask you for a description of what you're doing in the intervention. So you'll notice here it will have 11/25/2025 is when this intervention line was added. And it said targeted early phonics instruction 3 times per week. And then it says, I think that says 20 minutes per day in small group. And so we can add that intervention line and then begin to track from there forward again, like with Ethan. So we want to make sure that you know that that feature exists and that it exists again at the individual student page in the overview tab where the graphs are applied. So I'll pause just a moment. I guess the last thing is to show you that we also have the parent communication letter, which will also show data across the year in the parent report. It shows it in summary format only, no graphing right now. It just shows where they were at a static moment in time against those benchmarks using our PIL framework here as an icon to help illuminate sort of that level of risk, again, with the icons being descriptive down here at the bottom. So now I will stop and see before I go to more resources if you have questions about any of the individualized sort of student features or any of the data views that sort of show the class to the student level that might be helpful. And I'll just take a quick pause. I have a few more resources and then I'll open up for some more questions. Or if you like, I'll go live in ALO and show you something in ALO if you have a question, and I can demonstrate it live through the platform for those who use the platform. So take a moment. All right, I don't see any questions.
Sorry, Lisa, if you prefer to ask your questions verbally, you
unmute. Oh, yes.
Yeah, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. And
absolutely. If you have other questions, please always. Let me go here to just show you a couple of things that I thought would be maybe timely for where you are through the educator lens. One, we have a progress monitoring sort of guidance document that we provide. It's on our website. So for many, you're at the point where you've had some, beginning your screening data. Maybe you have used monitoring. Maybe you're thinking about refining monitoring. Maybe you've wondered what to do if the student can't perform at grade level material for benchmark. Why would I monitor them at benchmark and grade level material? Why would I monitor them there? You wouldn't. You'd monitor them where your treatment is being provided. So this talks about how to do out of level monitoring. There's a lot of things inside of this resource document which can be found on this page, which essentially is our website page. And then you just select the product Acadience Reading for grades K to 6, and it is on a carousel at the bottom as one of the resources. So I think this is a good resource for where you are, and also for that step 3 and step 4 part of the framework that we talked about, where you're making decisions using progress monitoring data. The next is the goal setting document that we have. This talks about the initial goals and about those goals inside of ALO, and it gives it more information about that and how you can think about individual goal setting. So wanted to put, the initial goals information here. We do have another page that's dedicated to Pathways of Progress that I also could drop here in a moment if helpful. And then we wanted to make sure that you were always remembering that inside of ALO, if you're using ALO, that we have a resources button at the top. And when you click on the resources button, it opens and expands 3 tabs. One where you can get to the free student materials for downloading. That's for progress monitoring as well as benchmark. You can get to videos that show you how to administer the measures inside of ALO if you're new to digital scoring. And then it has a Help Center link, which links back to our online knowledge base that allows you to ask and answer questions, get some of the information from already formatted response articles. Anyway, so those are there, and we wanted to show you that. We also wanted to show you that, again, if you are ever feeling like you need more practice, you need support for administering the measures, maybe you're getting ready to go into a new season, a new time of year for benchmarking, and you want to review, we have a way to get a practice app. The practice app lets you repeat over and over and over without consuming student licenses. It's like a wash and repeat practice session. So we wanted to make sure you were reminded of the training and practice app that was there. We also wanted you to know about our inbox for support. We always like to remind people that info@acadianslearning.org is a general inbox supporting educators with all kinds of questions. So please mark it, use it whenever you need. And then our website, acadianslearning.org. We're about to go through a refresh of our website. So I went ahead and took a screenshot of the new, not yet released website, which we're trying to streamline a little bit, but I'll show you that Help Center is in, is in a different location I'll come back to. But right here, we have a place that we're organizing all the resources, the ones I just showed you about, the articles or the guidance documents, into a resource hub. We have a button for training, and we have something called Mentors. And so our Mentors network where you can go, as well as a store where you can get a few ancillary items. Then we have our assessments and other resources that are here. Again, just reading and math assessments broken into different grades, and then you can read more and or learn more about them from those. But all the resources will now be in our hub so that they'll be centrally located and easy to find. And then with that, I'm just going to pause again to see if there are any questions and or if going live into the platform would be helpful for anyone. I'd be happy to do that as well. Yes, I see a hand. Please, I don't know if she can unmute herself or if somebody's going to have to unmute her. But I see Elizabeth Brown's hand up.
Yeah, you should be okay, Elizabeth. You have to come off mute though, too.
Okay. Yep. Now it will let me. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
When you were walking us through some of the different options for organization on Acadience, I was trying to follow along on mine, and I found where to add the intervention line notes, but I could only ever sort by one category at a time. I wasn't sure how to, you had both selected so that then grouped students. I couldn't get to that phase. I could get it to let me organized by one, but not by multiple profile subtests.
Actually, let me tell you what's interesting to answer your question. I'm going to show you something, and this is what I love about it. And I'm going to show you something. Okay. I'm in a fake district, test district C. I am going to go into one school, and I'm going to go into one classroom just for the sake of, so we're just in one teacher's classroom. And I have a whole year's worth of data in here, so I can't, fake it like it's coming up with an empty, because we have the full picture. But here's what I want to show you. When you land into a classroom, you see all times a year as the first filter. Okay, so that's what you see. If you want to see the expanded view, like individual measure scores, you have to pick from the calendar, beginning, middle, or end of year. Okay, so just because of where we are today, I'm going to pick middle of year just for this. And this happens to be a first grade class. Okay, so I can see really quickly, and I'll zoom in, that I have a column with student name, then I have the composite score, then I have every individual measure score in here. And then you'll see these carets and then you'll see these filters on each side of the column. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute, but I wanted to draw them out. When you are in a time of year of a calendar, this little waffle pops up, and that little waffle matches the grouping worksheets I was talking about. So when you just click the waffle, it already did the sorting for you. And it has highlighted the 2 key indicator measures for this grade in this time of year. And so you'll see them gray shaded in the background here, all the way down through the end. So that is how it will automatically do it for you, right? Okay, so I'm gonna come off of this, and I'm gonna take the waffle off for a minute. Now you're just back where we were a minute ago. I'm gonna say you're working with a data team. Maybe you're working with your colleagues, maybe you're working with a coach, maybe you're making a plan, and you want to know something that's not those automatic grouping sheets, right? You want to know who's struggling with accuracy, and that's what you really want to know. You can come in and you can select. So can you see the highlight? I highlighted it by clicking here, and I've selected accuracy, and now I just want to see any student who is in the red or yellow zone for accuracy only. So this is in Miss Carson's class. This is first grade. This is middle of year. And every one of these students is struggling with an accuracy issue. Now, if I wanted to say who's struggling with both fluency and accuracy, I can come in and I can add another. So it kept this one. I can add another one and say who is in the well below and below category for both fluency now and accuracy, and I've narrowed it again. So meaning if you choose to use the filters here at the columns, you can change your view to any view you want for anything you're wanting to focus on. Our initial groups are going to focus on the 2 things we're saying are most important right now, that if we don't address them, we might have a risk later, right? Because we wouldn't have attended to it as a preventative thing, and therefore it becomes more of a risk later. But let's say you're planning, and so you want to go different than the grouping worksheets, and you want to look at things maybe across an entire first grade. How many kids are still struggling with accuracy? How many are still struggling with fluency? How many are struggling with both? And you think about it more strategically outside of just a few kids or just your classroom. That's what the filters allow you to do, is to do that sort of sorting with any one of the elements, score types that you can have here. And again, you just use the column filters for that. And then there's a reset button where you can just clear the filters, and then it just goes back to, taking them off. Like you can just come in and you can take them all off. And then now you're back to the larger, a larger group if you want. But anyway, so that is a feature that's available to you inside there, depending on if you want to leverage the grouping in suggestions or whether you want to make your own decisions off of more customized fields that you're thinking about from a data team's perspective. Sorry, what was the waffle step? Should I go back and do it again? So
no, the step was what I missed. That was what I missed. I didn't know that little box was there. So it was only letting me go to one column at a time.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't able to add a second until I clicked one of the other filters.
Yes.
So it kept just toggling me back and forth between a set of data. I couldn't get that same view until, but I didn't know that waffle button existed.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions that anybody has? I'll just say, because sometimes like this is how you get to the goal setting. You click anytime you see the goal. And if you click it for that student, that's where you get to the goal setting for the individual kid that you maybe want to modify or change. I wanted to just show you how easy it is. So I do this a lot of times for people so that you can see you can't really mess anything up. Not really. So if you look here, and you see each of the performances at each of the pills, and this might not be the best student. I'm gonna pick one that's. I'm gonna pick one that has a little more risk. I'll pick this one. So, this gets the student to benchmark, and you can see that like here, this student's hovering right in the well above typical pathway, but getting just to the benchmark, on each of these. They just, sometimes they're in the above typical, sometimes they're in the well above typical. This is just an example, but if you wanted to change this, and of course I wrote them down for the other student and then I didn't write them down for this kid. I usually try to write them down so that I can just show you, because I don't know if somebody else has customized it or not, but I'm going to go and just to show you the function really quickly. So I can start with all of them here, and you'll see there is no composite, score, and then I can start to make decisions. Well, I think for correct letter sounds, I want them to get to at least the benchmark. When does that happen? Oh, it happens right here. I want them to be right at benchmark. Maybe no, that's too close. I want them to be a little above benchmark, like whatever. You can sit here and you can adjust. I want them to get to right at the benchmark. I want them to get words correct. I want them to get, again, you can say whatever. I want them to get right to the benchmark, or, and again, accuracy. I think that I want to get into at least 90%, or I want to get them at least 95. Like whatever you want, you can, make these determinations and customize them, any way that you want to be able to get to where you need to be. So if I were looking at this isn't exactly what it was before, but you can see that it's individual decision making. And if I chose to hit save, it would change what was last there. But if I decided that I wanted to just reset it back to where it was, it'll just go right back to the reset that was the original system initial goal. So you can play around with it and also reset it. Yes. Did you have a question? I'm sorry, I missed it if I spoke over you. Okay. So that I wanted to show there as well. So, and at the bottom, it'll say save changes, and I can't read what this is because my bar is at the end. Cancel my changes. Yeah, there we go. So, all right. Any other question or thought? I did say I would go into pathways of progress, and I wanted to share this with you here just more because I didn't add this slide, and I thought later this might be a page of information that speaks to the way our growth and it works. And this also talks about an introduction to the pathways, as well as talking about the goal setting that we just went over. And so that's at the bottom here on this page as well. So there's the link for that. Yes.
You should be able to unmute
Thank
now,
you.
Janine. Yep.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this. Quick question. Have you gotten requests from CTSED's MTSS for you
Not
to help us get the data directly from Acadience imported into that platform?
Yes.
You have. Okay. We're trying to get the progress monitoring data directly into CTSED's MTSS. It's the new module. It's not CTSED's, as we know CTSED's, but it's the other module. It's for Gen Ed. So this way we don't have to manually enter it. And so we filled out all the data sharing agreements and all of that. So I just wanted to let you know that I've talked to Terry Allen, and I know PCG is working with the State Department, and they're working with you all and making that request. So I just wanted to share that with you.
I think that this is an evolving conversation. I'll circle back to Terry and just make sure that I'm getting the communications. But we have done something. we have done something recently in preparation for requests that are coming in from all over for us to be able to work in exchange to put our data into multiple different systems, right?
Okay,
And
good.
so we have just released an open API where individuals can call data. Right now, what we've been doing historically is we've had a file share setup where we would export that data on an automation, drop it into a folder location. Somebody on the other side would pick the folder up and then they would have to manually ingest it. So that is still available.
Okay.
But we heard from people that if we could ever expose an automation, connection where they could just call and return it, that they would do the development on their end, to connect
Okay.
to that. So we've just finished that and haven't yet worked with a partner, but I did know that we had some requests to start doing that. And I was being scheduled into some meetings to start to learn more about those requests from third-party entities, like not directly our LEAs, for example, district representatives, but those that they work with, and to figure out what that looks like, because it's new territory for us, right?
Yeah,
Because we
sure.
are
Us too.
being protective of your data, and so it requires these new emerging things like data sharing agreements and addendums and whatever. But we are open to it for sure to make lives easier any way we can. So I'll
Well, that
check
would be
back with
great.
Terry, and then
Mhm.
if not, if we can't trace it back to the right one, I'm going to write your name down, and I
With
will.
Fairfield Public Schools.
Okay, thank you.
So there's sort of two initiatives. The state is going to be
Yes.
taking our data, and we already signed that. And I think at first, and this is my fault, Terry got confused and said, I think we're talking about two different things, and we were, because I think I connected my second ask to that initial
First
thread.
ask. Yes.
So that was my fault. But we are. These are two different asks, and we're not going to be the only ones to ask that.
Of course, it sounds like
So
Mhm.
yeah, so just to make you aware that we're hoping, because this way we don't have as much to do on the teacher end. We're trying to automate this as much as possible to have the least number of platforms in our lives. And yeah, so we're always trying to streamline things. So thank you.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Well, as I said, we're always here for exploring new opportunities and answering your questions. So don't forget, info@acadianslearning.org is a great contact email for our team, and they should surface, up to the right individual. Sometimes that's me, and sometimes it's others on our team. But anyway.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And
Bye,
thank you to the
everybody.
department for the opportunity. Mhm.
All right. Yeah, I don't see any more questions, Elisa. So last call here for questions or comments. I started the meeting by saying we're not talking about state policy stuff, so I'll finish it by saying an announcement about state policy stuff. So we sent an email last week in regards to the data collection that we're working under. And if you didn't get that email, it went to the K3 contact. So just an FYI, if you didn't get it, you might want to check with your contact, or if you are the K3 contact, find it in your email inbox. It's sort of the latest update on our efforts to collect this data. As Janine mentioned, we had worked with you all to sign the DSAs and so forth. So anyways. Okay, Elisa, thanks for your wisdom and expertise once again. And thanks everybody for attending the workshop today. We will see you another time. Be well. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.